Good day, everyone, and thank you for your attention. I'm Justin, and with me is Rachel, and we'll be presenting the Cyborg from Homo Economicus to Homo Eroticus. Our presentation today is a reflection on the following question: what does it mean to be human in an age shaped by digital advancement and ecological precarity, particularly when these developments are mediated through capitalist logics?
These complex challenges pertaining to technology and ecology, what Hurst Rittel and Melvin Weber describe as wicked problems, lack clear solutions and are often exacerbated by binary oppositional thinking: nature versus culture, mind versus body, human versus non human. Raoul Adam and others argue that these problems persist not due to scale alone, but because of the limits on our imaginaries imposed by these binaries.
Pope Francis in Laudato Si identifies this mindset as the technocratic paradigm, privileging abstraction, instrumental reason, control, and finance overwhelms the real economy. He writes, reducing decision making to economic growth at the expense of its sustainability and justice. This worldview produces an anthropology where the human is treated not as a relational being, but as a resource, a Homo economicus. The Homo economicus is the human shaped by neoliberal rationality, as Wendy Brown explains in her book Undoing the Demos. Here, neoliberalism is not merely policy, but a rationality that reconfigures humans as entrepreneurial, self-optimizing entities. This rationality erodes solidarity and reduces citizenship to mere market participation.
As Elaine Graham notes, technological development is not neutral. Seamless digital life in the global north depends on exploitative labor in the global south. These market driven technologies, fashioned to support such order, constrain our imaginative capacity to envision human and post human futures.
As a response, we propose an alternative anthropological framework, a shift from Homo economicus to Homo eroticus. Whereas Homo economicus reduces the human to an overly achieving, self maximizing actor aligned with market logic, we imagine Homo eroticus as a technologically embedded subject oriented toward relationality, creativity, and resistance. Our imaginative process uses a methodological approach based on a liberationist theological framework, drawing specifically from Elizabeth Johnson's articulation of the threefold process of analysis, critique, and reconstruction. This method enables us to situate theological anthropology within the material and ideological conditions of the present while also opening possibilities for a constructive reframing. We begin first with the step of analysis, analyzing the situation of humanity in the current capitalist world order. Wendy Brown uses the notion of Homo economicus to describe a pervasive rationality which recasts humans as human capital, self-investing, risk-managing, market-oriented. Brown notes this model becomes all-encompassing of human life. For instance, human value aligns with financialized capital and political life is economized to the detriment of the common good.
Elaine Graham emphasizes that technology emerges from exploitative economic systems. Infrastructures enabling augmented life in the North often rely on the precarious labor in the South. Post-human imaginaries are already shaped by capital accumulation. This can be seen in what Byung-Chul Han describes today as the burnout society, not repressed but overstimulated, driven by a demand to perform. A new form of depression emerges from an apparent excessive positivity that masks an exhausting and highly pressuring compulsion for productivity. For the sake of productivity, desire is curtailed and we become cogs in a machine. This curtailing of desire is not without precedent or history. Christianity has contributed to that, especially in the way we have tended to put eros to the wayside.
We now turn to the next step of critique. Christian tradition, as Whitehead and Whitehead observe in their book Holy Eros, especially in the medieval West, has supported the structure in our previous analysis. The ways in which Eros has been suppressed has contributed to a crisis of imagination and the commodification of human labor. Although mystics like Teresa of Avila used erotic imagery for divine encounter, this perspective remained peripheral. Dominant theology favored a disembodied spirituality and treated desire with suspicion.
This dichotomy, noted by Benedict XVI in Deus Caritas Est, cast Eros as morally inferior to agape. This division fed a theology that moralizes against embodied desire while capitalism commodifies it. Agape becomes functional, aligned with care or service, while Eros is pathologized. Capitalism extracts human labor while erasing agency. Theology's imagination shrinks under moral binaries. Recovering Eros means resisting both suppression and romanticization. Held in tension with agape and kenosis, it can enrich our understanding of subjectivity and divine human relation.
We now arrive at the third step of our methodological framework, reconstruction. In this section, we explore a theological anthropology that affirms Eros as crucial to human identity, particularly within a technologically mediated context. Drawing from the theological and philosophical traditions, we propose Homo Eroticus as a response to the reductive figure of Homo Economicus. This reconstructed anthropology resists binary thinking by positioning Eros not as opposed to agape or kenosis, but as a co-constitutive dimension of relational life. Byung-Chul Han's analysis is instructive here. In his work, The Agony of Eros, Han distinguishes Eros from its capitalist distortion, pornography. His critique is not of Eros per se, but its degradation within a system that prioritizes product and consumption. Under this regime, Eros is flattened into spectacle and stripped of its relational, imaginative, and transcendent dimensions. This observation invites a theological retrieval of Eros, not in service of market desire, but as a vital force for human creativity, vulnerability, and communion. Based on thinkers like Sandra Friedman and Alec Irwin, Eros can be understood not solely in terms of sexual desire, but more broadly as a force of relational intensity, one that draws the subject out of isolation and toward the other.
In the figure of the cyborg, we find a generative site for theological reconstruction. As Donna Haraway has argued, the cyborg functions not simply as a technological entity, but as a critical metaphor that destabilizes essentialist and binary categories, nature and machine, human and non-human, male and female. It resists the logic of separability and instead foregrounds relational entanglement, hybridity, and mutual constitution. By identifying the cyborg with Homo Eroticus, we deliberately reject narratives of purity, whether imagined as purely human or purely technological, narratives which are themselves products of binary oppositional thinking. Rather than viewing technology and embodiment as opposing forces, we affirm a subjectivity that is technologically situated, theologically open, and relationally constituted. The cyborg, in this view, is not a clean synthesis of categories, but an implosion of them, a figure formed in and through messy overlapping relations, historical, material, ecological, and symbolic. This vision carries practical and theological implications. It challenges ecclesial and educational structures that continue to marginalize or sanitize embodied desire. It opens new possibilities for how theological ethics might engage with technology, not merely as a tool to be managed, but as a medium through which human relationality can be deepened.
In our reconstruction, we draw on the conceptual resources of Donna Haraway and Raoul Adam, who, from their respective locations in feminist social science perspective and education theory, offers strategies for thinking beyond binary oppositional frameworks. While their work is not explicitly theological, it provides valuable interpretative tools for dismantling inherited dualisms that continue to shape anthropological and theological discourse. Haraway's figure of the cyborg challenges the essentialist boundaries between human and machine, nature and culture, organic and technological. In this way, the cyborg challenges the coherence of the modern technocratic subject, a hierarchically conceived center of knowing and acting. In the post-human condition, as Haraway and her interlocutors argue, the human is always already co-constituted by technological, ecological, and social relations. To further this critique, we turn to Raoul Adam, whose pedagogical framework offers a method for unlearning binary logic through the principles of contiguity, relationality, and contextuality explained on the slide. This framework is particularly generative for theological anthropology, where dualisms such as body and soul, divine human, male female, are often treated as ontologically fixed rather than as historically constructed, categories rooted in particular metaphysical assumptions.
The cyborg for Elaine Graham is a sacramental figure, one that resists purity, embraces entanglement, and gestures toward divine immanence in and through technological embodiment. She argues that the sacramental imagination, in which the material world becomes the medium and sign of divine grace, offers a way of overcoming the entrenched binaries of modernity: spiritual and material, sacred and secular, transcendent and immanent. In sacramental theology, divinity subdues the material. If the dominant anthropological paradigms of modernity have operated by reinforcing the division between the human and the divine, the sacramental logic that Graham describes transcends that dichotomy. It invites us to perceive technological and ecological assemblages as sites of divine presence and ethical relation. In this light, the cyborg is not a deviation from the human, but an invitation to reimagine the human as radically relational, ecologically embedded, and theologically open. A subject who no longer seeks transcendence through disembodiment, but who inhabits and transforms the world through presence, responsibility, and love.
With the sacramental imagination, we envision an erotic cyborg, which is a technologically embodied human subject who enacts eros, kenosis, and agape not as separate modes of love. Eros from within this imagination is not simply reducible to sexuality or romantic longing. As both ancient cosmologies and contemporary theology attest, Eros is a cosmic life-animating force, that which draws the self outward in pursuit of connection, beauty, creativity, and justice. This desire is not inherently possessive or exploitative. Rather, it becomes so when instrumentalized by capitalist structures that flatten Eros into consumption, as Byung-Chul Han or Herbert Marcuse have observed. A paradigmatic instance of this is the case of pornography, which Han describes as the profanation of Eros. Under capitalism, Eros is stripped of its relational and imaginative dimensions, reduced to visual performance, commodified pleasure, and spectacle. The erotic is severed from intimacy and reciprocity, and instead placed within a market logic where desire is emptied of depth and made endlessly consumable. What we are reclaiming in an eros that refuses commodification, and that the erotic cyborg resists the reduction of desire to productivity or spectacle, and instead the eros becomes the theological energy that fuels presence, empathy, rest, and resistance.
It is important here to distinguish our claim from the common refrain that you cannot give what you do not have, which frames love and service in transactional scarcity-based terms. This logic mirrors capitalist assumptions, where giving is understood materially and linearly, as if love must be possessed, quantified, and distributed. By contrast, the cyborg anthropology we propose affirms that the self is not a sterile, closed unit, but a creative erotic mess, simultaneously self-giving and self-gratifying, self-emptying and self-fulfilling, Kenosis, when grounded on eros, does not lead to exhaustion, burnout, or self-erasure, as it does for Homo economicus. Instead, it leads to creative vitality, a dynamic interplay between desire and service, devotion and delight. Thus, Homo eroticus, as erotic cyborg, stands not in opposition to Christian love, but as its critical retrieval. Eros need not be tamed into agape or kenosis. Rather, it is what enables them to be embodied and live not abstractly, but passionately, relationally, and with radical commitment to transformation.
Finally, we propose the figure of the Christian cyborg, a theological vision of the human as both redeemed co-creature and co-creator within a digital and ecologically precarious world. This proposal is grounded in the Christological affirmation, Delexit Nos, Christ loved us, and draws on emerging paradigms that challenge human exceptionalism and anthropocentric dominance. Our approach coincides with what N. Catherine Hales, in her book Bacteria to AI, and others have described as a shift from an isolated, autonomous subject toward ecological relationality. A recognition that human life is sustained in and through interdependence with a multitude of biological, technological, and cosmic systems. The Christian cyborg affirms that personhood is not limited to self reflexive consciousness or rational deliberation, but includes responsiveness, attunement, and co agency across a wide range of beings. Drawing from new materialist and post humanist thought, we acknowledge that cognition is distributed not only across neural networks but across organisms, environments, and technological assemblages. This expanded anthropology calls for a reconfiguration of what we mean by aura, no longer the exclusive domain of the human, but extended to animals, artificial intelligences, microbial life, and planetary systems. Such a reconfiguration challenges the theological legacy of dominion and instead affirms humanity's vocation as companion, not overlord, accountable to all forms of life that participate in the shared labor of sustaining being.
This framework is not alien to Christian theology. In the Lexit Nos, paragraph 65, the heart of Christ is described as the site of a threefold love. First, infinite divine love. Second, spiritual love grounded in Christ's humanity. And third, sensible love expressed in affective bodily life. Such an anthropology affirms that divine love is not abstract but incarnate, and that the image of God manifests in concrete, embodied relationships with humans and with the more than human world. In paragraph 33 of the same document, the emphasis falls not on doctrinal precision, but on Christ's actions, his gestures, his presence, and his interactions with others as the primary revelation of divine love. This active, embodied, and responsive model of love forms the theological basis of the Christian cyborg's vocation. To embody this love in the contemporary moment is to resist instrumentalization, not only of the human, but of all forms of love. It is of life. It is to participate in what we might call sacramental co-creation, engaging the world not simply as a raw material to be mastered, but as a shared field of divine presence and ethical responsibility. The Christian cyborg thus represents a theological anthropology responsive to our time, one that integrates eros, kenosis, and agape, and affirms bodily relationality, and that reimagines human agency as collaborative, ecological, and eschatologically open.
In sum, this inquiry reimagines theological anthropology in the context of capitalism and technology. As a suggested reconstruction for theological anthropology, the erotic cyborg resists reductionism and simplistic nostalgia, opening space for ethical transformation. This vision calls us to the theological reflection shaped by AI, ecological crises, and late capitalism. Homo Eroticus centers love as a passionate transformative force, especially for the vulnerable.
Our proposal joins wider efforts to reframe subjectivity around mutuality and interdependence, not extraction or control. The Christian cyborg invites us to see love not as a private feeling of or commodity, but as relational energy for coexistence. Such love, embodied, disruptive and generative grounds our hope for a theological anthropology responsive to our entangled. Thank you.